thank you all for coming back to this afternoon's session. And I'm not going to go through my whole background and things again, but I just want to acknowledge that I am from Illinois School for the Deaf, and we do provide free presentations for general ed, general ed, special ed, deaf and hard of hearing teachers, sign language interpreters, paraprofessionals, speech therapists, audiologists, parents, all on the topics regarding kids who are deaf or hard of hearing and birth through 21, and we'd be happy to do a presentation for you. Please just check us out online at the Illinois School for the Deaf. So today's topic is going to be working with students with sensory loss and disabilities. We're going to take a look at a variety of disabilities, but you know, there's like a whole range, because children who have vision loss or children who have hearing loss are a wide category of abilities, needs, ages, degree of hearing loss. So I'm going to try to present for you a different perspective for thinking about this, to kind of take a look at the feelings behind it and maybe help you if you had to share information with other staff members about a disability that your student might have. So I hope that you'll gain some additional information and skills so we can help the kids meet the rigorous academic standards that we have. I'm going to talk about some challenges that kids with sensory losses might face, what strategies we might think about to meet their needs, and again, I ask you to think about sustained learning. If there's some information or an idea that you can share with your colleague or might be applicable to one of the students that you work with, or perhaps might work with in the future, to kind of jot that down, tuck that away, or share that information with your colleagues. In looking at sensory plus disabilities, the children in the literature have been called deaf plus, deaf with disabilities. There's different ways to describe this population. And what I'm going to talk about will be kids that have these as identified disabilities, but sometimes you just have children that have the characteristics of someone with that disability, to have that pattern, but maybe not that identified diagnosis. And it would be good to think about how we might be able to meet that child's needs, even if the diagnosis isn't there. How many kids are we talking about? It looks like somewhere between 20 to 40% of children who are deaf or hard of hearing have an additional have a disability, and those are usually identified through specialized testing or developmental checklists, and looking at, is that child's pattern of learning different from those of a typically developing child with a sensory loss. But I think it's important to remember that kids who have a hearing loss or a vision loss, there are always strengths, even when they have a disability associated with it, and that there's potential for each and every child, no matter how severe their needs are. And I think from the child themselves, we can look at their strengths, you know, what what might they be proud of? Are they thoughtful? Are they helpful? We need to find their unique strength. It may not be an academic or a new skill, but there is something that's underlying there that is positive, and we need to bring that forward all the time. And from the parents, that they can add like caring support and love to the child to help them develop resiliency, to want to keep trying, to move forward even when things are getting hard. And as a former administrator, I think we need to look at the child's strengths and their unique needs and recognize that everybody is different. So even if someone received this now or in the past, it may not be appropriate for this child's needs now. Or perhaps it's appropriate at this point in time, but later on, we might need to look at more or different or less services for the individual child. We just need to look at what is needed for success. And when we're thinking about sensory loss and disability, it's really those interacting factors. The sum is greater than the individual parts. It's an evolving interaction with the kids, a combined effect. It's hard to separate and say, this is because of their hearing loss, this is because of this is because of this, and assign different people. They're one person. And that's when it gets kind of hard for us to decide, because it sometimes is a challenge. You can't just address the one slice. You have to look at them as a whole child. And I like this quote from Beams in Hands and Voices Communications Considerations Deaf Plus. The way a child learns is more than the sum of all the challenges faced. And I think you agree with that. This is a list of the eligibility, disability categories from ISBE, Illinois State Board of Education. And what's important to note is that sometimes when one of these is identified for a child, it can mask that the child actually has a hearing loss, because what people see may be something bigger or physical, and that they want to address that. But there's actually a hearing loss factor that needs to be monitored, because it can be overshadowed by those people that are more familiar with these other disability characteristics or disabilities. This is a list of different syndromes that children might have, and I'm sharing that with you because we need to be sure that we are looking to see if hearing loss is identified when children have these different syndromes, because it's typically a characteristic or is a part of the diagnosis of a child when they receive those. And it may be something to be familiar with when you come across that, to know what other support personnel might be helpful for your student if you're seeing them for the hearing loss and these other syndromes happen to be identified. And we have to think about different factors. That's the factors we always think about for hearing loss. Is it mild to profound? Is it sensory neural, conductive, mixed, auditory neuropathy? When did it start? Is it progressive? And that's important, thinking about, is it progressive? Because sometimes we don't see the impact of the progression like right away. It's, because the hearing may have dropped, but they still know what they knew yesterday. But where we see it is further out down the line, where they haven't been able to access the information in the same way. When did support services start for them? What's the mode of communication? And I'm not identifying one method or another. It's just looking at, is it used consistently? And do the children have access for complete information for that mode? All those things we talked about in the morning, the theory of mind and being able to communicate, is that mode able to communicate all that information with them? And their language level is of course, an important factor, as well as hearing aids, FM, cochlear implant. Not only do they have it, but do they wear it? Or does it just only appear when school begins and they're entering the school door? And is it functioning correctly? That studies have shown that for like preschoolers, maybe half of the equipment is not functioning up to its true potential. So we need to think about this. Is it checked regularly as well as used regularly? But there's some non-hearing loss factors when we're looking at kids with disabilities. We need to think about the type of disability is, and are there more than one? How severe is it? When did it start for services? And also the personality strengths. It may not be math is their forte, or PE is difficult because of physical or attentional challenges. But if they have a personality that's positive and they could get along with other people, that's going to help them a long way when they're in work-type situations. I mean, think about it. That's the kind of people that you want to work with, people that are positive and will work through a challenge and really try. So those are some of the things we want to instill, as well as coping strategies. Are they aware that they have this challenge, and do they know what they can do to help themselves? And what about strategies? There's not going to be just one thing that we could recommend for all kids or all kids who have a certain disability. We just need to continuously monitor the program and look at the success of the kids. But we know that these children are probably going to take longer to learn a skill and to be able to apply it in different environments. Also with this population, we absolutely need to function on functional skills and transition skills. I'm going to talk a little bit about intellectual disabilities. And I don't know if you are familiar, but maybe a long time ago, the technical term was mental retardation, and before that were like words that we would just find offensive right now, that those children were called. But they moved from, a state-approved word of mental retardation to cognitive disability, and in my opinion, nobody really knew what that meant. If you ask a mainstream teacher if there's a cognitive disability, they might say yes, and because they had difficulty with math. And so I might inquire, well, how are they with like their bathrooming skills and their play skills and dressing? Oh, that's fine. Well, maybe that's not a cognitive disability. So we've moved on to intellectual disability, and about 9% of the deaf and hard of hearing population kids have that as a disability. I saw one study which was kind of interesting. It was a small study. They only had 48 kids, but they had Down syndrome. And those children with Down syndrome were found, in that study, it was ossicular abnormalities in Down syndrome, that they found 83% of the kids needed tubes. So that's maybe a structural reason that their eustachian tube is not operating the same way, and they may be more prone to ear infections. So something to take a look at. So to qualify for an intellectual ability, you need to have below average cognitive functioning and deficits in adaptive behavior. And those have to occur like within the developmental period, like 18 years old. And what we find when those children have both of these components, that they will learn more slowly. And it's a challenge for them for academic information because it's hard for them to kind of reason things out or to make a plan or to understand how things relate to one another. And so we see difficulty in choice making or problem solving and setting goals. So the degree of delay is how delayed that they appear will match with the category of the identification, mild, moderate, severe, or profound. But what I think is really important is that you have a person that's able to contribute to a differential diagnosis, that they could separate what is because of an intellectual disability and what is because they're a learner with a hearing loss. And I think if there's someone that understands deaf and hard of hearing or vision loss that's on that team, that they can contribute information to see, is it impacting just the language areas, but the performance and the memory is good, then it's more likely a result of having the hearing loss. And this is just purely anecdotal information from my experience in sitting in on lots of staffings where there was expertise in deafness shared, but for those students with significantly hard of hearing, that maybe their verbal scores might be 75% of the performance, whereas with a deaf child, it might be 60%. And so to look at that and see the delay and automatically move to a cognitive an intellectual disability would be a mistake. And we need to not look at the full scale scores because that's embedded the language influence in it. And so you probably have had to have that discussion with different people, with psychologists, to help them understand the impact of the hearing. And every person can develop physically, mentally, social, emotionally, but it may take more structure, it might take more time and more support to be able to advance. But I think we need to celebrate those advancements of children with these challenges. So if we took a look at adaptive behavior of these areas, the ones that might relate to hearing the most is social and communication. So if the other areas are okay, but social and communication are delayed, it could be a factor of the language influence and the hearing loss. So those are required components, but we need to take a look at how that is and how that is in the home and at school. And we want to honor the students' strengths and be forward thinking, that we want to make them independent as possible and self-reliant as possible. And in honoring the strengths, I remember having staffings in a building where the children had significant disabilities in the classroom, but they were mainstreamed in a PE environment. And every time the PE teacher came to a staffing, they were very positive about the growth of the student, that they would take the time to say, you know, they can do this skill now. They could skate on the carpet, where before they were very shy and didn't want to come in the room, but they always said something positive and was able to note some kind of growth for the student, because the parent doesn't want to hear that their physical skills aren't the same as their typically developing peers. The parent already knows that. So I think it's really special if we can honor the strengths and find something positive to say about their personality or their willingness to persevere or their resilience. So some things that you probably know, that we have to use visuals. That's a constant necessity, one step at a time. We need to generalize things to be consistent and to rephrase rather than repeat. They may benefit from some prompts, multiple opportunities to practice, but for kids, maybe, it may be applicable for some kids with a vision loss, that if they're capable of still seeing information, the visual might help. But for them, of course, tactile information and consistency with the tactile is important for them. But I have an activity for you that looks at the necessity of visuals. And so I'll ask the interpreters, you don't have to sign this part because it's just the words up here. So I'd like you to take a look at this next screen, and we'll say what this says. Ace, curb, Paul. So what does that say? You guys can say it to yourself or say it to a partner. Just say it out loud, maybe help you. How about if I show you a picture? What is it? Ace, curb, Paul. A soccer ball. So a picture does make a difference in your understanding. I got a couple more because they're fun. Okay. Brack, does, may, spur, vec. Practice makes perfect, that's it. And this might be easier for the interpreters because they're used to trying to fill in the blanks of what the speaker might have said. But practice makes perfect, makes perfect is the answer. And so when we think about kids with hearing loss, they typically developing peers may enter with the readiness skills for listening and reading, where our students don't have that auditory foundation. They're missing this, and then they're asked to do some things with sound that might be challenging. So I want to try a couple more. I have a few more. Exit sign. You can say it out loud, it's probably easier. Exciting? Exit sign. I mean, these aren't perfect. I just made them up here. Use them acknowledging class. You can say them out loud or to your friends. What's the message? Teacher just gave this direction in science. Use the magnifying glass. Use the magnifying glass. Okay, I think this is the last one. You guys got it? Gate jar ducksin arrow. There's the clue, the visual clue. You guys got it? Say it out loud.
Get your ducks in a row.
Get your ducks in a row. So this was just a way to kind of point out how the visuals help, and the visuals what might help give you a context to what's going on. And kids also need support with idioms and figures of speech, and they're not going to pick up the information just from overhearing. You know all of this, but we've added that as a layer to the disability, and you may need to kind of step in to explain that if you're working with other teachers that are addressing the other disability, perhaps. That we would look at teaching those functional skills of time and money, make modification, picture-supported learning, and independent living skills is a big thing with the kids. Functional reading, one of the teachers I know, she always had something about the weather so that the kids could kind of learn to read things about the weather just from the picture cues that they see. Money and coupons are something else that's interesting, because sometimes with the coupon there's a picture of the item, and they may come to learn that it's worth something valuable to help them pay less. So some different ways to think about it, going to a fast food restaurant and looking at the picture menu might be something that we can introduce early for the kids. And schools nowadays, schools and teachers want to reduce the barriers to learning. So they're looking at ways to make modifications and accommodations. That a modification is going to change what you're teaching or what you expect the kids to learn, how you're testing them. So it might be that you're giving a different alternative book that's at their reading level, or you're using other picture supports, they get to use a calendar, you're grading the information different. Sometimes a small modification might make a drastic improvement for the child, but we always need to discuss this at the staffings, at the IEP meetings, because we have to say whether or not we think the children are going to meet the general ed requirements if they have these modifications. So maybe instead of cutting and gluing, they're just gluing because of physical challenges, and maybe the test has picture supports with it, and so on. Accommodations are more like you're doing a change to the environment, or you're just trying to work around the identified disability so that you're giving the child access to learning or access to communication. Maybe they have a peer that they work with side by side, or they're offered multiple choice, or they get extra time for tests and tasks. But these are kinds of things that would be on the IEP of a child that has additional kinds of needs. And I know that some of you have kids with behavior challenges. I have a little bit, some, but maybe not everybody. But for the children with behavior challenges, I know you've heard a lot of information about how to set things up for them, and the reinforcements, and collecting information so that you can make a functional analysis of their dysregulation or the aggression or something that you're seeing. And you know, I always wanted to say this to a group, but I always think of functional analysis as like the what for, why are they doing this? And I think that's what it should be called, and then we would all have an understand where we're trying to dig deeper to understand that. But sometimes the kids might have just a minor behavior challenge, and then we would address that with supports, just classroom supports. So this is going to be a little different perspective for you. Okay, have any of you experienced children with these challenges, running, kicking, throwing? Okay, are these behavior problems that you see? Okay, well, what if I gave you a little different way to think about it? If you're saying yes, then they are indeed at the level where they're behavior challenges for the student. But another way to think about behavior is, are these things ever okay in a different situation? Is there a time that running might be okay? When is running maybe okay? Recess. PE class, yeah, because you'll be in trouble if you're not moving when you're in the PE class. Okay, how about kicking? Is kicking a, what? Soccer, yeah, playing soccer. How about throwing? Is it okay to throw stuff sometimes? Yeah, throwing a ball, you're playing a sport. So one way to kind of think about it for us, of just adding that other background information and another level to think about things, is to help explain to kids that there may be situations where it's okay to do this, but not in this time. Like running in the hall, it's not okay to do this, but running outside at recess or at, on a sports team, that's okay to be running. And we have rules about that, about walking in the hall. But why do we have rules? Why? What? Safety? And we have rules so we know what to do. That rules help us know what to do. And that might be a way that we could explain to the kids this rule that just happened. It's a different way of thinking. And this comes from, I may have mentioned this before, the Bright Start curriculum for young children, Haywood, Brooks, and Burns. I am not sure if that's actually accessible to be bought, but some of their publications had to deal with rules. And to be explicit in explaining to the kids why do we have rules, that it's not because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. It's just so that we know what to do. It helps us be safe, and it helps us know what to do. And of course, we need to be sure that the child with the hearing loss knows that tapping their pencil is maybe interfering with our friends' learning because the sound is bothering them. Yeah.
And continuing that thought, my idea is always, if you take something away from a child, you tell them when they get it back. So if they can't do this now, you not only tell them when they can do it, but like how long until that is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good point. That we have to give some more information to the kids or explain about it, and sometimes in the moment is not always a workable time to do it. And so maybe we might talk about rules and why we have them earlier when it's in regards to something that doesn't involve aggression or an out-of-place kind of behavior for the kids. And in that same curriculum, and by the writings of that author, they talked about like a cognitive awareness of self-regulation, like being able to have in your mind thoughts about, can you regulate your behavior, your body, not because there's an authority figure asking you or telling you to do it, but because you can. And so an example might be, we might say to the kid, like, sit up straight or move your arm away because it's starting to, have a slide into another child that might present a challenge. And so like a cognitive thinking way might be to ask the child, can they control their arm? And like in the moment, it might be too much of a discussion and they might not get what you mean. But in trying to explain that through activities embedded in other times might be, something easy. It might even be like a red light, green light, or a fast and slow. Can you freeze your body? Can you copy your body motions to me? Can you make your arm do this? Can you make your arm do that? You can control your body, and that's kind of like a strategy that we can teach the kids that's just a different way to think about behavior. I know this may not be applicable for all of the behaviors and all of the kids, but maybe we need to think about embedding this and teaching those kinds of skills. In that copy thing, can you control your body? Can you copy me to match to the teacher? Is like a concept of matching to a model. One time in a preschool where they used this curriculum, a little girl went home and said, I don't want to be a model for good behavior. And so they were able to get that, sometimes we look at models because they help us know what to do, and that was a technique that you used earlier for theory of mind to model things when people didn't quite see things the same way that you do. And so if you're matching to the teacher, now you might ask them to close their eyes. Can you match to the teacher? And no, that's more challenging for kids that have hearing loss. They need to see the teacher, and so they get some information that looking carefully or watching carefully or attending helps us know what to do. And so I have a little activity for you to do in a little group to kind of, you can do this as a little matching activity, and you probably don't really need to write on them. You could just talk about them. But then talk about if you think that you ever may have heard someone say these things and what it means to say them in a more cognitive thinking approach. So one for every 2 or 3 people here. I'll pass those around. Okay, how did we do with the first one on the frustration side? I've told you a million times, don't walk around with those scissors. What might be a more cognitive thinking approach? Anybody? For the first one on the A side, or is it easier to do it on the other direction? Okay, we'll go the other direction. What's the rule about yelling? That might be the more cognitive way to approach it. What's the rule about yelling? What matches up with that? It's too loud. And that might be like a comment we just make, but to put it back to the rule, and the reason we're not yelling is because everybody wants to be able to play this, do this, and that we need to be able to know the directions, or we need to have nice behavior so we can all play together. But there's a rule for that as opposed to just asking to stop. What can happen if you walk around with those sharp scissors? A. I've told you a million times, don't walk around with those scissors. And so what this kind of approach is asking a thoughtful question, like what will happen? Not just asking them to stop or put the scissors away or sit down, but asking what might happen and help to kind of mediate, like we talked before, of getting in that zone of proximal development and talking with the student, thinking about what might accidentally happen if they're with the scissors. Mike's kicking the table. Why should he stop? And this might be if it's a group activity that you're looking at, or to say it's interfering with our learning and we want to learn. Or Mike, your kicking's interfering with our learning. Or Mike, where's your leg? What's your leg doing? Can you control your leg? So any of those might be a more thoughtful kind of way to respond. What does that match with? Does it match with any of these here? I don't know.
B.
B, okay, stop kicking. And so that would be the response as a reminder or a warning or a response to authority, but asking the child to think about what his leg is doing and can he make his leg stop? You know, he may not want to, but can he do it? Can he try? And that comes from, again, that it's a concept that's introduced before there is a behavior challenge. Maybe it's just introduced as a fun way. Can you do this? Can you copy that? You know, for little kids, there's a book from head to toe about you know, being an animal and I could do this motion, can you? And that might be just a simple way to introduce that to little kids, but even with older kids, you can do that stop and freeze or try to do something you know, goofy with their hands, and can they make that happen? How about, why do we need to pay attention to directions? So we know what to do, so we don't get confused. Or what happens when you don't pay attention to directions? What might happen? And again, you'd have to use this in the language and understanding of the child. But which one does number 4 match with?
D.
D. You didn't wait for directions and now you did the whole thing wrong. And I'm sure that we've come across that happening. But again, it's not just that they have to listen to directions, but why do we have that rule about it? So you don't do it wrong or you don't have a mistake. This way you know what to do, and we feel good when we know what to do. And the last one, let's make a plan so you don't forget to do your homework. E. Did you finally remember to bring your homework? So making a plan for things is part of a cognitive thinking way of approaching things. And I know that I have people that I've worked with before in the room here, and we actually have done this with kids to introduce these thinking strategies to them and then applied it to different learning or behavior situations. And even without a curriculum, it's just an overlay language to what you're already working with the children on. Anybody have any comments or anything? Do you see this happening with any of the kids that you're working with here, or other adults interact with them in maybe the second column way? Nope, everybody's got good kids, okay. That's okay, that's okay. But you know, I'm just trying to present a different way of thinking about kids' behaviors. And we know that whatever their behavior is, it's a way to communicate to us, to get their attention, to get control, to avoid something, a person, task, place, a thing, to regulate their senses. That, you know, maybe the child that's hiding under the table is really too overwhelmed by what's going on in the classroom. And to communicate things to us in a nonverbal way to get their needs and wants known. So if you had a student that's running out of the room, which would be on the side of, not things that you could do or that's okay to do at other times, or maybe it is okay to run out of the room when the day is done, I don't know. But if you had kids, what might be the purpose of that behavior? Which one? Or all of them? All of them, depending on the situation, and that's what your what for analysis helps you know what else is going on with the child, of what might they need or what are they trying to tell us. And, that we might look at when is that behavior occurring? Is it structured time or unstructured time? Sometimes when we're helping the mainstream general ed teacher figure things out, this might be what we're posing with them, but also thinking about when does it never happen? What are they doing that they never do this other thing? And it may be something that they're engaged with that they really like, that might later become a reinforcement for them, that's an activity where they don't run out of the room if they get to do whatever it might be. Something to think about, and these areas might impact a student of what happened before because of a change in routine. You might see that happening with kids, or you're changing from one task to another. I mean, at home, maybe mom says, you can't start this other thing until you finish this thing. But at school, we're like, math, and everything has to go away. And we make them change the routine, whether they're ready or not, whether they've are prepared. And so we give them additional warnings. Or sometimes they expect it too hard, or the task has too many choices. At recess time, they just stand there because they don't know what to do because there's all these things. And maybe we need to give them just a few examples to pick ahead of time so that they have a chosen activity and aren't overwhelmed by that task. And for some of the kids, without regard to their age, they could be high school kids, and they don't trust that promise, because from their experience, even though they're promised to be rewarded, it hasn't actually happened for them, or the goal is set so high near perfection, they know they're not going to be able to meet it. So I think this helps me when I'm thinking about golf, and I need to change my golf behavior, that you need to tell me what I'm doing right, because I can't fix all the things at the same time. It's like an awful lot to hold in my head. And, and just tell me the big ones, sometimes if you just, oh, the weight on your back right heel in the back, right, but I'm holding the club kind of crazy, and that's a bigger one, and we have to fix that one first. And then reward me, tell me I did good because it went in the air. For a while, that was my goal, that the ball went in the air. So you might see that, people are accepting of shorter term goals than you might expect. But I wanted to throw this in there because a lot of information about reward. We could keep passing the candy around, guys, but the regular and sugar-free. But this about rewards and being consistent with the rewards. And here's just a little different idea, comes from that cognitive, thoughtful way of thinking about it, but to make learning or the task its own reward, that you did this. You must feel good about that. You finished that, or you finished it early, or you didn't get them all right, but you really tried. And we pair that with the reward. In the true cognitive approach, they might not even give a reward, but for some of the children we serve, we probably need to pair it so that they're not just working for the extrinsic reward, that we're thinking about pairing it with that good feeling that, the ball finally went in the air that I get. And, you maybe don't have to give me like a whole lot of praise, because my praise praise is, ooh, look, it went, and that was the reward for me. So that's a little bit something different to think about, not to stop with the stickers and stars, but maybe also to match with that good feeling. Does that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. And looking at environmental changes, how the room is arranged, where the child might be seated, who's sitting around them. Those are kinds of things that we have maybe easier control of. Putting positive information on their desk so that they know what to do. A rule card, for example. A rule card that's stated in a positive way. And some adult behaviors might need to change. Parents might think, well, they're finally quiet. They must be doing their homework, I'll leave them alone. Or the folks out, I'm just using recess, or it might be study hall or whatever, that they're quiet. So I'm just going to let them be. But maybe a better approach might be to intervene and reinforce or praise so that they have more contact when something is going right, when something is positive. And to give clear directions, rather than watch that cup fall, it would be hold your cup. And again, the language might be of an influence there. But changing these kinds of things, sometimes we have to change the other adults that are interacting with the kids just as much as we might need to present some extra things for the student. And to substitute a more socially appropriate behavior, give choices, maybe give a signal, some kind of nonverbal, or if it's a child with a vision loss, it may be some other kind of tactile reminder that you can let them know about a time to do something differently. And being able to request a break, that's about that independence and self-reliance, and know that that's within their power and something that they can control. And perhaps you might just need a hurdle help where they have something positive as a reminder of what to do or what to do next. Antiseptic bounce that they go to another teacher and she just looks at the note and says, well done. And the student goes back as a way to kind of just separate things. I'm going to talk a little bit about sensory integration, and I know a lot of you have gone to very specific information about that, but I'm going to give you an example that I think you can use when you're presenting information to families or other support staff of what it might be like. And someplace I heard this example, but if you think about you're driving and you're going home and you're very tired, and you're in the car, what might you do to alert yourself? Right, pat your face, you might get a drink of water, you might put on music or talk radio or put the window down or the air on. You're trying to change things that aren't going to take your attention away from driving. It's going to make you more alert, that you're alerting your system. And those are the same things that we might do with children, that those same kind of things, like maybe they need to take a break and maybe you need to pull over and take a walk or stretch or do something else when you're driving. And this example, I think, is kind of helpful for people that think that doing these things may distract the child as opposed to alerting them. But these are things that we really do, like grip the steering wheel tighter, and those muscle activities might be for kids. And you might even set up a plan. Well, let's talk about what you might do to calm yourself. If you're tired and you need to unwind, what might you do at the end of the day? Some people may sample different beverages and see which one works the best. There's milk and other stuff. And, so that's a possibility, or maybe you dim the lights, or you read a book, or something that's calming to you. And those kinds of things are in the same way calming to kids. And sometimes we set up a schedule for kids to alert them or to calm them. But think about that driving experience, and let's say you had this schedule where you were, going to stretch or do whatever before you got in the car, and at 10 o'clock you're going to get out of the car and take a walk or whatever it is. But now let's say that you're running late that day, and you only get to your car at 10 to 10. Do you really want to drive 10 minutes and take a break? No, it doesn't make sense at all. That doesn't fit. Or if you started way early and you left like at 6 in the morning, maybe you need your break earlier than 10 o'clock. And so we need to think about that for our kids as well, because sometimes in school we set up a schedule that at this time they're going to do this, and then we're going to give them this opportunity, but the day's schedule was switched for them, so they're not actually doing a writing activity or a long sitting activity, and we need to set the schedule to match what their needs are. And another match that we need to do is, let's say you're driving in the car, and you're with your friend, but you really have to go to the bathroom. You do not need alerting, you need a bathroom. And so your friend's trying to keep you alert and say, have some coffee, have this cold drink, maybe you want some water. Let's make the air conditioning really cold. Isn't that nice? It's starting to drizzle. Whatever they're doing to keep you awake, it really isn't a match what you need. So sometimes we think with kids that have sensory integration challenges, well, this worked for this kid, or this worked for them last year, but sometimes their needs change, and we have to match the thing we pick that what's currently their need. And so it's just a different way of thinking about it, and maybe it's an easier way when you need to explain about sensory integration to staff that you work with or parents that you support, as a way to thinking about how that might impact them if we don't set things up that match their needs at the time that they need it. And you might find kids that are overly sensitive to things, and okay, I'll tell you, I don't have any tags in my shirts. I just don't like tags in my shirts. But I think I'm a pretty successful adult, even though I have this one little sensory area that is a problem for me. I just take the tags out and then everything's okay. And so maybe we can, I can take them out myself, but if it's a child, maybe they could request that it's out if that's something that they're able to do, to kind of see if we can involve the child in the process. There may be kids with tactile needs or vestibular or proprioceptive. Sometimes you might have a child going down the hall and they're bumping into everybody, or they're bumping into the walls. And it may be kind of thinking like, a little bit like, the gutter protectors in bowling, that they're just using that to kind of keep them in the middle. And when they bounce, then they know they need to go the other way because they don't have a sense of where they are in space. They're just a different way to think about that. I know my mom sometimes used that technique when walking down the hall in using a walker, that it was hard for her to negotiate right down the middle. And something else we might need to think about was what's the child seeking, and is there a way to provide that, to accommodate that, to make them aware? If you have a goal with sensory, can that goal also be for them to become self-aware and know what their options are? And that sensory diet that we talked about, this This book is How Does Your Engine Run by Williams and Schellenberger, and a lot of you know that. It's asking for the kids to be aware, are they running fast or are they running slow, and can they identify that? Sometimes there's areas that the the OT might do, but we hope that these things might be available to be integrated once the therapy is not needed. One thing I would probably be cautious about is like a weighted vest, that you don't want them to be overly sensitized, that you have a bunch of those in your closet left over from some other kids and you're just going to try them out. And we need to use some caution in thinking about that. Okay. The next area is attention deficit disorder, and Gallaudet is saying about 6.5% of kids with attention deficit, with hearing loss, have attention deficit disorder, and that in itself isn't a special ed disability category for us, but it will fall under other health impaired. So we're looking at kids that might have 6 of these presentations if they're under 17 or 17 and older, 5 of them, and these across 2 environments. But I would be cautious about the one that says does not listen, especially when we're thinking about our kids with hearing challenges, that they may not have access. But there was one study I saw about memory skills of deaf learners, implications and applications by Hamilton, and said that in a parent rating scale, 14% of the hearing parents of the deaf parents of deaf students had identified an attentional deficit. And deaf children of hearing families, it was 38%. So we would want to see, are we working on the same definition there as what is not hearing or misunderstanding the same as not attending? And there are some hyperactivity ones. I'm not going to go through all of that, but it's not really a matter of choice for these kids. Once we explain that to them and we help them find self-control, that they may be more successful, but they need some help. And I'm going to give you a little activity that will maybe help you think about kids that you feel are distracted a lot. So again, I'm like big on knowing our colors, and so we have another activity with your color knowledge. So I'd like, as a group, if you could read out loud these words you see. Let's just say them together. Yellow,
green, purple, black, blue, orange, green, purple, blue, red, yellow, blue, orange, purple, black, red, blue, orange, green, blue, yellow.
Wow, you guys studied. You guys are really good. Okay, I'm going to give it to you one more time to try, and I know you can read your color words. Just tell me the color that you see. The first one's green. Everybody ready? Green? Oh, can't see it. Okay, well, it's a good thing I ran off copies for everybody so they'd be able to see. Okay, here, if we could pass these, if we could share. Pass them in the back. Here. Ooh. Sure. I thought maybe we might be able to work it out. Here. There's a couple here who can share. And then when I get back to the front, we'll do a little reading together. Yeah, sometimes the lamp on the LCD projector changes the color. Everybody have one? Everybody's good? Okay. Read it from your card then. Read the colors. The first one is green. Let's read it together. Green.
Green, red, orange, red, green, purple,
Red, yellow, blue, orange, blue, red, blue, purple, green, orange, green, red.
Okay, if you read it really fast, even though you really know your colors, and I would say, I think you were really trying to pay attention. You weren't distracted from other things. You were really attending to the task, but it was a novel task, and you had to do it a little bit differently, and it wasn't automatic for you. And I just thought that this was maybe a good example of a way to help try to explain that you may want to do the right thing. You were trying your best, and I in the middle, you kind of slowed down a little. At the beginning, it was easy because you got to see the chart ahead of time, and you can internally practice that idea. But this was just an example, a way to kind of think about that it may not be as easy as we would expect for the kids to attend. And we can't compel the parents to provide medication for kids with attention deficits, but knowledge is power, and I believe that we're all supposed to receive training about ADHD and different treatments and medication so that we're up on the latest information. I saw something in Diagnosing Learning Disorders, a neuropsychological framework that said psychostimulants, like the medication that kids might receive, is highly effective in 75 to 90% of the kids where there is hyperactivity or impulsivity. And I thought that was interesting information, but again, that's not for us to diagnose or recommend medicine to the kids, but if the children are taking it, they should be monitored so that it's the correct dosage and we're seeing that it's helping them. Sometimes medicine alone, but also these other structures and supports are helpful for the child to make progress. But you guys, really, you did the best, I think. You know, you guys probably, of all the groups I gave, you guys read the list really good, so you should be happy about that. And I think just to kind of things that we know about minimizing the distractions that we can. Sometimes we do need to look at the lighting for the kids or the ink, and to enlist the parents' help and not sweat the small stuff there. Okay, for kids with autism spectrum disorder, I read something that 1 in 76 students who were deaf have autism spectrum disorder. And I think like some statistics for the hearing population had 1 in 68 children, 5 times more common with boys. But I think this is another area that it's very important to have a differential diagnosis, that someone has expertise about kids who are deaf or hard of hearing or kids that have vision loss, so that we can separate what might be characteristics of autism spectrum disorder and what might be related to their deafness because of tone of voice that they use and the kinds of activities that they may not be less socially engaged. But we need to have that information to make a diagnosis of the child. And so the verbal and nonverbal communication's not developing in a way typical of their peers who have hearing loss or vision loss. And that they may have kind of shadowing of some of the same characteristics, but we need to look at those things like joint attention that we talked about earlier, or imitation, or reciprocating feelings to give us information about that. I'm just going to kind of move through. You can read through these things about social skills, again, with their affect and is it appropriate to the situation. Unusual interests or behaviors. Not all kids have stereotypic behaviors, but you know that we need to fill out information that describes how the kids are doing under these different situations. For those kids, it's helpful to have perhaps a sensory diet for them, a routine schedule with transition time, to think about replacement behaviors. And oh, wait, I was supposed to tell you, at the beginning of the presentation, and I'm sorry I forgot, that really we go till 3:30 today. I don't know, it's something with the paperwork and ISBE, but don't worry about it. But this session actually ends at 3:30 today instead of 2:30. Let's see, where was I here? Okay, and when we're looking at reading skills for kids, we had a boy that had autism spectrum disorder, was deaf, or a cochlear implant, but he did know sign language. And when he would read, he would sign to himself, and that gave us insights about what he was thinking with the print. And so that was one way to see, and for that child, it was successful. For other children, sign was not successful for them. Okay, I'm going to just tell you that you are also the politest group I've had, but you are giving me some looks now about, like, why are we going till 3:30? I could tell that that was maybe not something you liked from just your expression. Sometimes when I tell people this, there is a lot of grumbling that I could actually hear, you know, or maybe they just like to their partner, well, I don't care. They told me it ends at 2:30, I'm gonna leave at 2:30. I think that they should have given us advance warning if they're gonna change it. They can't change this like, you know, 15 minutes, a half hour before we're supposed to be finished. But I am kidding. We're really ending on time. No worries to you. But I just wanted you to know what our... Did somebody already leave?
I'll talk to Sherry about this.
Okay, well, we'll have to tell them that really it's going to end on time. Don't worry about it. But it's just an idea to give you like what it's like if you have a schedule and how important that is for a child with autism spectrum disorder, because it's just a little thing. Don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. These are things we say, and I know you guys were like, you were very polite, but I could just tell inside there was like a rumble, 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 and I'm going to do it the way they told me, and it's not fair. So what I'm trying to do, there's a lot that you could say about different disabilities and things, and I just wanted you to know that this is how the kids might be receiving that information and feeling. And when I had presented this before, people were like, can we tell other people it's going to end late? And I said, because there were other groups going on, I said, you can, but you better be sure that they know that we're just kidding, and it's just a way to illustrate a point that we might not think it's significant. And so what we might do, we can't come up with a little picture schedule with every possible variation, and sometimes just a little triangle on the schedule that indicates something's going to be different is a way to alert them to know that today is a different day. But again, you don't have to stay till 3:30. So different strategies might be the kinds that we know about, working with all kids with a sensory kind of loss, that we need to be sure that the other people that work with our kids know about the working hearing aids and the eye contact, if that's appropriate and available, the visuals, like we did that activity before, and engaging language that, like for kids with vision challenges, that they would want to stay in the activity. They might need more wait time to respond. They might need technology. Structure definitely helps. Generalizing to other situations, consistent routines, social stories that are told or videoed with themselves or another person that models that behavior. Now we're able to do quick little things to catch that for kids as a way that something that they could look at and refresh. That we might want to look at the importance of schedules and marking it for an upcoming change. Choices that the kids have, first then, those are all things that you know. And what I wanted to just end with today is that a quote, one of my favorite quotes from Helen Keller: "Alone we could do so little, but together we could do so much." And I really want to thank you for coming here today. I think each and every one of you has a special caring for the students that you support and the desire to learn new information and be informed. And really, I think it's wonderful that you came to get additional training and that you're part of the behavior services with the ISRC. So thank you for all you do for kids.